Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Pro Manchester's weekly COVID-19 briefing with Grayling PR. As you can see from the holding slide that I just shared with you, today our special guest will be Mo, who's both co-chair of the GM LEP and also founder and CEO of the Infor Group. So, which you will hopefully be aware, we follow a similar format for all of these weekly briefings. It feels like we've been doing them for a lifetime, but I believe we're up to, I think it's now episode 4 of these. What we aim to do within the kind of next 30 to 40 minutes is to run through all of the announcements that have come out over the last week at a national and a regional level. We say it every time, a lot happens in a week, and it's very easy to miss some of those key announcements, additional detail on some of the support packages that have been coming through. Grayling do a phenomenal job of sending out a daily briefing every evening, which summarises the key announcements of the day and keeping everybody up to date. If you haven't yet signed up to receive those, I do highly recommend it. The details are on the slide, which I'll share again later in the presentation, but we'll also include the link when we send this round. We, as ever at Pro Manchester, are doing what we can to stay as close to our members virtually as possible, to make sure that they're getting all the information that they need, that we're answering the questions, and really are incredibly grateful for the level of support that we're seeing day in, day out, of members keen to offer resources, to offer knowledge, to get in touch and really make sure that Greater Manchester's in the best position that it can be during this crisis. And I think it's fair to say that over the last week, some of that conversation is starting to change, not just to what do we do whilst we're in this crisis, but actually how can we collectively start to look ahead to what that recovery is and what might life look like on the other side. We don't have all the answers. If we did, we would be in very different jobs to the ones that we're in. But what we are keen to do is to share as much knowledge as we have as to some of those conversations that are going on, and also to make sure that kind of members of Pro Manchester and the wider business community can put their thoughts and experiences ahead and let everybody know how you're dealing with the crisis, what kind of issues you're facing, and also to keep sharing out those pockets of good news in the way that we're responding. So that's enough from me. I'm going to pass over to Chris, who is going to do his roundup of all the announcements, and who will then pass it over in turn to Mo. As ever, we will end with the Q&A, so please do use the chat function with any questions that you have that you would like answering, either by Chris or Mo, and if we're able to, we will address them within this webinar. If it's not something that we're able to address live, we will take that offline and endeavour to get back to everybody with those. So without further ado, Chris, I shall pass it over to you to start the weekly roundup.
Thank you very much, Ilona. Hello, everyone. Thank you again for joining us if you have watched us previously and joining us again. And hello to anyone who's listening for the first time. As Ilona said, I'll try and do a quick run through of what's been happening this week. Locally, I won't touch too much locally this week, simply because having Mo on, you really don't need me to tell you what's happening locally. I think we've got a far better person in Mo to talk about Greater Manchester than me, but I will touch on it. Then look at nationally what's been going on for the last 7 days, and then a very brief look at some of the international news that's going on as well. So to get started with this, we've had this afternoon, Andy Burnham has done his weekly press briefing on his meeting that he has with leaders in Greater Manchester. Really interesting stuff has come out of it in terms of what's going on. He's highlighted that around a quarter of the money that's available for Greater Manchester business has already been paid out, and so that's being pushed quite quickly. I know Mo will touch on that a bit further. He is also keen, as I've said in previous webinars, to want to push government to make sure that they're doing everything they can to support communities and business. And Andy, as our mayor's lobbying is quite intensive. And certainly, I mean, 3 things he mentioned today in his press conference is that there are 3 gaps that he believes that exist at the moment, the government and Rishi Sunak as Chancellor needs to look at. The first is people who are recently self-employed, who have no other support than universal credit. That's an area he wants the government to look at. He wants the government also to look at people who work in shared workspaces and particularly startups, who are also slipping through gaps of government support. And finally, he mentioned about people who started new jobs after the 28th of February who are not eligible to be furloughed. Well, as Ilona has been speaking, I've just noticed some breaking news that actually has said the government is extending the furlough cut-off date from the 28th of February to the 19th of March. Now, by no means am I claiming that Andy lobbying on this from this afternoon has worked, but it is certainly a good sign that the government is listening. And I think we have seen these last 4 weeks that when there are big gaps the government have missed through the speed of which they're having to act, we are seeing them look back and seeing where they can correct things. So again, it's one of those things where we just need to keep an eye on, see what's happening, and again continue pushing government when necessary where there are gaps. So going on to the national news that's been taking place for the last week, there has been some major announcements that hopefully you have caught up on and seen, but just going to quickly run through. As we know, the Prime Minister is recovering at Chequers now. He has come out of hospital. And that means the first Secretary of State, Dominic Raab, is still deputising for the Prime Minister. There's no date to suggest when the Prime Minister will be back. They're being very keen to really focus on that he needs to recover, and they're certainly not rushing it. Although I think there are members of the press who are really keen to want to challenge the government on who's in charge, who's making the decisions. Certainly it seems there's quite a united front on how the government is managing the situation and allowing the Prime Minister to recover. The government has all week repeatedly needed to defend its position on testing and being challenged about PPE. It's something that we've discussed in previous weeks' webinars that we've done, and it is an evolving crisis that they are struggling to manage. Furthermore, it's now clear that there is a greater crisis developing in the care sector that is something that hasn't really been focused on in the last few weeks. I think that's something that will develop quite quickly, and we'll probably see more announcements on over the coming days. Yesterday was quite a busy one for the government, particularly because of the Office of Budget Responsibilities report that suggested the UK economy could shrink by 35% in June as a result of the lockdown. Now, this report is not predicting what will happen, but it was one of possible scenarios that could unfold. And it has led to the government having to make some very difficult decisions, and certainly there is concern about what will happen in the future if this particular scenario does unfold. The Chancellor has said that tough times are likely ahead, and that the UK would not be able to protect every business and every household. That's a huge contrast compared to what he said only a week ago, where you will not be forgotten, and that's something that certainly Andy Burnham's picked up on, and others now challenging the government to ask why that change has taken place. The Chancellor has also stressed that the single most important thing to aid the UK economy is to protect the health well-being of its people. He noted that protecting the economy at the expense of public health would be self-defeating. That's certainly something that's being quizzed by the media of the government about when will we come out of this? Where is the priority in terms of public health versus the economy? Something that we're certainly seeing from America with Donald Trump, his focus on wanting to open up the American economy again, trying to drive growth, whether that should be done at the cost of lives. Now, the British government certainly have been very clear that it is about protecting the health and well-being of people. So I think it's a strong message from the Chancellor that we saw yesterday. A couple of other important things just to note from the OBR report are that they believe that through this scenario they discussed that the UK economy would contract by 12.8% this year, but they would expect to return to pre-crisis growth by the end of 2020. They also think that there could be an unemployment rise of around 2 million to about 10% in the second quarter of this year. So there's quite a lot of information that came out of that report, and certainly it's something the government are being very focused on in terms of the economic impacts. I know that's something we'll want to talk about from a Greater Manchester perspective later. Also this week, again, it seems a long time ago that we've had an Easter break, and what's been going on since then. We had Dominic Raab deputising for the Prime Minister talking about the Scientific Advisory Group, also known as SAGE, who are the group that's reviewing the data on social distancing. So they're the group that are going to be making a recommendation to government on the lockdown measures. Now, last week we talked about it, how the government are going to make an announcement as to what's going to happen next with the lockdown. We were expecting it towards the end of last week, but that's now been pushed back to this week, and it's likely to be tomorrow. Dominic Raab has already said that the government don't expect to make any changes. So if anything, the announcement we're waiting for is a continuation of what we have, but we don't know exactly until what date or when the next review will take place. They previously said that they want to look at it every 3 weeks. So a 3-week period is probably most likely, but again, we need to wait to see what happens. At the start of the bank holiday weekend, we saw the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, make her first appearance at the daily press conference, something that has been noted by a lot of journalists recently, that she has been absent from the government's response to COVID-19. And she launched a new national communications campaign, hashtag You Are Not Alone, to support and protect those most at risk from domestic abuse. And she also announced provision of additional £2 million to enhance support services, helplines, and particularly online for those people who do suffer from domestic abuse. There's been a lot of statistics come out about the rise of domestic abuse over the corona crisis that we've had, and it's certainly something that she, as Home Secretary, has been very focused on and wanting to see what can be done to help support those who do suffer from domestic abuse. We also saw Matt Hancock as Health Secretary launch the biggest diagnostic lab network in British history. The first of these labs is going to be in Milton Keynes. However, we are having one here in the Greater Manchester region in Audley Park, which should be open in a fortnight's time. We also saw, following our webinar last week, the announcement around charity support, something that we talked about last week, saying look out for it, and it did come only a few hours after our webinar, where the Chancellor announced £750 million of funding, including £370 million for small local charities who are supporting vulnerable people. So it has been quite a busy week in terms of what's going on, lots and lots happening. Just a little thing from the international scene from Europe. European finance ministers have now reached an agreement on a coordinated approach to try and protect the EU economy in light of COVID-19. So they have agreed an economic aid package. And further to that, there's actually been a recent leak of the European Union's exit strategies for coming out of lockdowns. Now, this is something that is particularly relevant in the UK because the Labour the leader of the Labour Party now, Keir Starmer, has been calling the government quite strongly to say, you need to present your exit strategy, what the government's plans are. Now the European plans have been leaked. I think that will only add pressure onto the UK government to show what their thoughts are and what their plans are in terms of whether it be a phased approach either through sectors or whether it be phased regionally, which is something I know here in Greater Manchester there's a lot of opposition to. So I think pressure will grow on that front. So just to finish off, just to look out for this next week ahead in terms of what major announcements are likely to come. As Ilona said, we're not going to get an announcement of exactly when all this will be over, I'm afraid. We are in this continually for the long run. But we are expecting a social care announcement that potentially could come this evening from the Health Secretary in terms of what's being done to support the social care sector and care homes. We are looking for, as I mentioned earlier, the decision on lockdown measures probably tomorrow, and that announcement of the next phase of lockdown. The furlough process is starting to be delivered next week, so there is likely to be a lot of discussion around that. And as I've mentioned actually as we've been speaking, more breaking news around how the furlough scheme will work and who's eligible for it. I think as it becomes clear where there are gaps, the government will need to address those. So again, that's definitely going to be coming forward. And finally, one for those of you out there who, like me, are a little bit of a political geek. Parliament is coming back in the next couple of weeks, and they're going to be coming back digitally and remotely, so rather than being in the House of Commons. Now, we're Grayling, as Ilona mentioned, we do our daily updates in terms of what the government have announced every day. We've actually now produced a briefing on Parliament coming back and what it could look like in terms of digitally, how it's going to look like in terms of Prime Minister's questions, how will they look at debates and be able to scrutinise governments. So if anyone is interested in that, please get in touch with me either through the webinar doing your Q&As or just drop me an email. I know Ilona's put on my email address on the holding page as well. So please get in touch if you'd like to be put on either the daily briefing, or if you would like to have a look at that Parliament digital briefing that we've done as well. So with that is a summary of the last week of what's been going on. So I'm very happy and delighted to be able to pass over to Mo, who's going to give us a bit of a rundown and a chat around what's been happening in Greater Manchester. Mo, I'll pass over to you.
Thanks, Chris, and good afternoon to everybody. Chris has very eloquently and succinctly sort of captured the update. Just to sort of give everyone a understanding of the depth of work going on at the Greater Manchester level. Luke Caldwell and I took over the chair of the LEP a week before the pandemic hit. So if there was ever a good timing to assume responsibility, this probably wasn't it. But come off the hour and all of that. So we've from the minute go, we've been very active, and the GM machinery has really kicked in. And one of the things I probably want to get across to everybody is that we're extremely fortunate in that we have an infrastructure, a developed and mature infrastructure that allows us to make decisions at an absolute pace. And one of the biggest challenges, as we've seen with government, is the fact that you have to make decisions in such rapid time with limited information. And as Chris has mentioned, there's been gaps and there's been sort of you go forward and you come back, and that's not easy to do, and having the infrastructure to do so is invaluable. So one of the things that we've got now within the GMCA, and Chris mentioned Andy's press conference today on the back of the COVID-19 meeting that we have each week with all of the leaders of across GMCA, as well as all of the professionals and executives, on the front line leading our response, and the fluidity with which decisions are made. Understanding of key data and the data availability of what's happening on the ground is immense. We also have a economic resilience group established at GMCA level. Again, that group meets for an hour every week, and again, all of the key data is shared and discussed, and our strategies are developed on the back of that. From a LEP point of view, I mean, Lou and I have been pretty much on a daily basis constantly engaged on different platforms, different forums. We're engaged at MP11 level, where the chairs of all 11 LEPs in the north come together again every week for an hour. And we're sort of engaged on a number of different conversations with the MPs of Greater Manchester as well, and you've seen some of the initiatives that we've launched on the back of the work we've done. I think it's very clear that our approach is, what can we do? I mean, there's one thing about the crisis has come about outside of our control. It's happened to us. But what is within our control, we're absolutely doing, and we've seen that, from the initiatives around the homeless to, the £3 million that we've announced, just recently to support the CBILS loan guarantee scheme. Our commitments across all of our provider network. All 96 education providers are supported now, and they are committed to over the next 12 months. There's a lot of activity that happens on the ground, and because we have this single part approach, we're able to mobilize funds and deploy them in the right places as much as we possibly can. Obviously, to a large degree, we're reliant on the government and what the government announces, but I can assure everybody that whatever is and can be done is being done, and our infrastructure is really coming good in that respect. Our focus is, as Chris mentioned, very much about the gaps. There's still, we believe, circa 25,000 companies who are probably situated in these managed shared facilities that are not going to receive this 10K grant that they normally would have been eligible to if they were in a property of their own. So that lobbying has to continue, because you're talking about 250 million quid there. That's a huge amount, and 25,000 companies who are absolutely probably on the edge at this moment in time in terms of cash. That £10,000 could be the make or break in their survival. When we've got 124,000 companies across GM, that's a huge number still exposed without any level of support that should have come to them. So that's a big issue, and again, Andy mentioned that, and we're lobbying that. We've written to all of the chief execs of the banks. One of the big issues is still the speed at which the banks are able to, deposit monies through the loan scheme. Hence why we've put this 3 million quid in. We've already had success through the growth company. The growth company are doing a superb job. And again, that's an infrastructure investment that we've made over many years, and the growth company is not only doing a great job for GM, it's actually supporting other growth hubs across the pan-northern area. So we, one just, anecdotally, just to give you an example, one company in Altrincham that we've just supported last weekend through the growth company, turned down by their bank, and we managed to support them with a loan within 12 hours. Now, that's a company that could have probably gone by the wayside if that emergency loan facility wasn't, and it's a profitable company, trading profitably, but they were just relatively new, therefore their balance sheet wasn't as strong, and that was the issue. So as much as we can, and we've got a request out to the private investor community, and again I make that sort of request here, that we've managed to unlock £3 million from within the public purse. We are now seeking for support from the private investment market to come in and invest into this endeavour. We're looking at schemes such as the community community investment tax relief, for where you are protected to up to 25% over 5 years, to further sort of de-risk the and incentivize the opportunity. So really, give you the sort of rate at which applications are coming in. We're seeing that within probably 20 days, we'd probably be able to fund 20 million quid. And that's the sort of rate at which the demand is there for loans that are critically needed. The other issue at the moment with furlough is, again, coming out of out of these 3 months. You've got this issue now where there's no commitment beyond the 3 months, and companies are looking at redundancies, which are 45 days statutory. We're on the 47th day, and you're looking at companies having to make a critical decision. The other thing is that furlough needs to be tapered. You come out of you're not going to immediately come out. There's a risk that some companies will not bring people back, because you're not going to have a return to normality instantly, and therefore there needs to be a tapering of furlough. So again, that's something that we're actively lobbying for. And again, we've got direct lines into ministers, through both GM and MP11. We're having regular communication with ministers in different departments, so we're able to make a difference. And our key thing is that in Greater Manchester, we have to be absolute that we do not want a single business to fail because of COVID. We don't want a single individual to be, you know, out of a job or adversely affected to the, you know, to that extent. We all have to bear the pain, but we should not have to suffer in a way that, you know, should be avoided or can be avoided. And therefore, you know, our efforts are, you know, unequivocal in that sense, and we will do everything that it takes to protect our people and our economy, because the future is every much on, you know, in front of us, and we have to be in good shape to be able to you know, get through this and then look to a new future, which I think is the key thing. There's a new future beyond us, and we've got to start looking at that, and therefore the work on recovery is already started. We've already sort of started to mobilize, you know, teams into starting to think about what recovery should look like for GM, where our focus should be. Again, we have the infrastructure, the you know, industrial strategy, our all focus around, you know, clean growth and digital and media and advanced manufacturing. So really, we're well placed to make sure that we can come out of this with you know, absolute positivity, but you know, we've still got to get through this crisis. We still have to protect our businesses and our people, and then look to the future simultaneously as well, because we will be back, and it'll be a different future, and we have to look to that different future in a positive way, because there are opportunities for us as GM, but you know, we were already behind the curve with infrastructure, and therefore we cannot take our eye off the ball, in the sense that government needs to invest further into supporting our infrastructure as well as supporting our recovery.
Thanks for that, Mo. I think that's been really interesting and helpful. Certainly setting that scene of what's happening in Greater Manchester and the work that you and others are doing at that Greater Manchester level. And I think that leads me on to one of the questions that we've actually asked previously of other guest speakers that we've had, and you touched on it actually towards the end then, about what do you think puts Manchester in such a good position to manage this crisis and to come out of it positively? I think you touched on there about the support that you're giving to companies, those that haven't been able to get those bank loans, that the passion that you spoke of in terms of supporting businesses and individuals in the city. What do you think that is so special about Manchester compared to other city regions that are facing similar difficulties?
Well, I think a number of things there, Chris. Yeah, we started this this endeavour to be a collaborative, a combined authority. You know, back in, you know, you're talking 1986 when AGMA was formed, and throughout the years, you know, we're on our fifth, you know, devolution agreement. And with Andy now, you know, leading at GMCA level. So what is our strength is that united capability, both in terms of people, a region, and infrastructure, and the mechanisms that we have now to allow us to be rapid, mobile, fluid in the way we approach and focus our our support and our investment. So I touched on the single pot, you know, so touched on our ability to mobilize on things, unlock things that other regions and other authorities would just simply not be able to do. Leadership is a big thing into that as well. And look, we've always prided ourselves on our ability to be innovative, to be, you know, together, you know, when challenge has come, crisis has come. GM has, you know, shone brightly in terms of its ability to come together, be united, and unity is underplayed sometimes, because if you've got fractions and a crisis like this comes about, those cracks become more apparent. But if you're together and you're united and, you know, you have a single focused approach, then you can get things done, and you don't waste time in arguments or petty politics or whatever else. So what you see now is probably years of investment and foresight and vision. I mean, look at where we are now with our, all of that vision setting, that we've done in terms of our industrial strategy. That's placing us in a very good position now to sort of fast track some of these things, because the opportunities are there now. If you look at clean growth, digital media, advanced manufacturing, you're looking at the domestic manufacturing market. One thing that this crisis has highlighted is our fragility around our supply chains. You're looking at global supply chains and our struggle to even get those basic PPEs, where if we had our own infrastructure, and that's going to be a focus in itself, that we have to make our UK domestic supply chain more robust. So we'll have that. So there's huge opportunities, and we can actually start those challenges now. We can start to move on that. There's another community that I'm very conscious about, is our digital tech startup community. Again, they're in that sort of gap, where they're not probably eligible to loans. Venture capital has sort of stalled. We need to look after that. It's taken years for us to nurture a tech community, a startup and scale up community. We can't see that go by the wayside, because that's essentially is going to drive our innovation and our future.
I think that's really interesting, Mo, particularly just thinking about, you touched on it again, another thing you were speaking about was the recovery, and thinking of, you're saying how you've got a recovery group who are coming together to look at what happens next. I know Pro Manchester are actively involved with the business community, bringing together the whole Manchester business family together to look at what comes next once this crisis is over. I mean, in terms of that recovery phase, do you think that we will go back to business as usual, or what normal was before this crisis? Or do you, like you're saying, the opportunity that exists, do you think that coming out of the crisis there will be a different look to what Manchester is and what business looks like?
I was on a webinar earlier, and I think this conversation came up again, and I think I'm firmly of the belief that the word back is not relevant anymore. I think we're going through this, and we're going to be looking forward, and back is not really an option. It has to be different. We have to now envision what our future looks like, and this is where everybody has to be mobilized, and Pro Manchester are doing a phenomenal job in doing that piece of work. That everybody has a part to play in setting the new vision, the refresh, the revived vision for GM. It has to be different, because what this has taught us is a lot of things have happened in 3 weeks that we were struggling to do in 3 years. It's happened. It's happening now. Day to day, things are changing, and therefore we have to now move with that, and we have to set a vision to see how we want GM to be in the next sort of 10, 15, 20 years. This is our opportunity. It is a once in a lifetime opportunity for us to reset and move forward with positivity and set the vision. The vision is so important now, because that brings confidence. And in confidence, then comes belief, and that's what we need. And the belief and the faith in our future is as positive as it can ever be.
That's great. One last question from me then, just to wind up. I mean, I think you mentioned how Greater Manchester is lobbying government on a regular basis through GM, and similarly yourselves through the MP11 group of LEPs. But is there what more can be done? What more should we be looking at trying to achieve at the moment? Is there more that you even think potentially Greater Manchester should be doing, or is there something that you need help with from the business community in Greater Manchester to help guide you with what's needed next?
I think what we need is we need to listen as much as we need to, shout where it's needed and push and lobby and petition. We need to understand, we need to listen to our businesses. What are the critical needs? Not every business has the same issues, the same challenges. It's a complex picture. One size does not fit all. So we need to be able to reach out to all of our businesses. One of the things that we're very conscious is who we are not reaching. There are people still out there that aren't accessing support when they could probably do so, or haven't got the wherewithal or the information at hand to be able to do so. We need to reach out. The growth company is doing a sterling job, as I say, in reaching out and using the networks and having the sort of signposting to support. But we have to continue doing that, and we have to keep on reaching out and speaking at forums like this and reaching out through our networks where there is need of support and listen, and then mobilize our effort accordingly. And what we're doing actively, what you're seeing from the press conferences that are coming out, the letters, that is what's happening from listening, and then for us to then mobilize ourselves in relation to that.
Yeah, and I think certainly from an outside perspective, looking at what Greater Manchester is doing, both from the Combined Authority, the LEP and others, is definitely happening. I mean, just from Andy Burnham following his telephone in with Radio Manchester, listening to an elderly lady speak about the difficulty she's having with her phone bills, worry about connectivity around that, led Andy then to write to ministers and the chief execs of every telecom company, asking them to support elderly and vulnerable people with telephones, because if they don't have access to the internet, it's their only way of communicating with people. So I think even from a single individual speaking up and raising that issue to, like you're saying, with the company in Altrincham needing help with their loan, I think certainly from a Manchester perspective, lots is happening, and certainly people like yourself and Andy are listening. And I think just from my perspective, just to finish off, then I think one of the takeaways from today is, if anyone does have specific issues, no matter how small or large it is, I think get in touch with the LEP, get in touch with the Combined Authority, get in touch with the Grove Company, and obviously get in touch with Pro Manchester, who can help direct you to the right people to speak to. Because I think one of the benefits that we really do have here in Greater Manchester is a family of businesses wanting to work together and succeed together. And when we have times like this, when we do need to work together to pull through a crisis, I think it really demonstrates what a great city we have and a great community we have. And on that really positive and high note, I think that's the end in terms of Q&As. I don't think I've got anything else to ask, Mo. So thank you again for coming and joining me today, and I'll pass you back to Ilona.
Thanks very much, Chris, and thanks again, Mo. As you say, yeah, a really positive note to finish on. We are all about collaboration, bringing businesses together. We're really proud that Pro Manchester is able to play its part at the moment in those calls, in the look ahead to what recovery is going to be. And I think, Mo, you're absolutely right that it's not about getting back to normal, it's about creating what the new normal is going to be. And really interested to hear from our members as to what they think that normal might look like, what their opportunity is to really shape what kind of world we go into once all of this is over. Looking ahead in the short term, we have our next guest speakers lined up for these webinars. I'm delighted that next week we will be joined by Alison Loveday, who is a partner at Kennedy specialising in employment law and also a past chair of Pro Manchester. Timing wise could not be better. As Chris says, we are just getting into the period where companies will be able to start claiming for furlough. Alison's going to talk us through some of those issues around furloughing, but also around remote working, some of the HR issues that companies will be facing. So really looking forward to hearing from Alison. And then the week after, on the 29th of April, we'll be joined by Sasha Lord, who will be able to give us an update on the impact of the hospitality industry. We know from kind of recent headlines that they are definitely one of the industries who are struggling the most with the crisis, and whether those measures are sufficient to be able to get them through. But also in terms of that real positive response, campaigns like United We Stream, phenomenally successful already in terms of raising the profile of the industry, but also in generating funds to be able to support us. So really delighted that Sasha will be joining us on the 29th. Pro Manchester is continuing with its digital events programme, so I do recommend you going onto Pro Manchester website, have a look at the events that we have coming up, a whole range of different topics there, of training sessions, roundtables, and as ever, if you do have ideas for topics that you would like us to recover, information that would be useful for us to share, please do get in touch and let us know, and we'll continue to do that. So that is it from me. Thanks again to Chris and Mo for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.